You've been to almost every single country in the world. Why not every single one?
They always think if you are white, you must be the central bank. I did in the 80s, I did the Trans-Siberian Railway. In the Iran-Iraq war, I stayed in a basement, in a shelter in Baghdad.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Every Country podcast. My name is Luca and I'm here with my co-host Philipp. And today, for the first time on the podcast, we have an exciting guest. This is Wolfgang Hux. No, that's not how you pronounce the name. Wolfgang Hux. Did I say that correctly?
That's correct.
Amazing. Would you be kind enough to introduce yourself? Because I'm sure that most of our viewers have no idea what an interesting life you have lived.
Well, I'm a 75-year-old retired air traffic controller. I stopped air traffic control exactly 20 years ago, and I had more time to travel. After that time, I did some acting for another 21 years, and I'm retiring now from this job too. So I worked in Innsbruck Airport at approach and tower control, radar control, and between 1974 and 2014. Sorry, 24. And so for 30 years. In my job, I had the ability to travel easily and cheap too. And I used this chance. My parents were travelers too, but mostly or mainly in Europe. And so when I was 10 years, 12 years, I got the interest to see everything in Europe already. Later on, specifically Africa was the major spot. I did more than 100 trips to Africa only. And later on, Asia came, Oceania, and sometimes I lived for 20 years also in Florida, and I'm happy to have seen many places. I've seen 185 countries, and I count 196 countries in my system, 193 members of the United Nations, and 3 additionals, Vatican, Taiwan, and Kosovo.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So as we're here at the Every Country podcast, the question quickly arises. You've been to almost every single country in the world. Why not everyone? Why not every single one?
Well, there's, as an example, Bhutan in the 80s was horrible expensive. I would have had to spend the whole year amount for traveling just to enter the country. So it hasn't been possible at that time. We are speaking about the 80s, 90s, or the 70s. So things were more complicated. And other countries, well, Afghanistan, the Russians were just leaving. So I thought, okay, I wait a little bit. Shouldn't have done that. North Korea, more than Panmunjom to the border, I didn't make. And the islands, they were a problem. The Kiribati and Tuvalu. I thought that's will be done later. But as you see, it's maybe too late. I don't know. A good friend of mine thought, well, we should go and see all the countries. Say, okay, if you buy the tickets, we do it. Let's see.
All right.
Or South Sudan didn't exist at that time, so I couldn't have seen it in this. I've never been in Yuba. And, well, I think those are the main countries I haven't visited.
That's very, very fascinating. And speaking about what you just mentioned, this is what we want to focus on in this episode, is how traveling nowadays differs from how traveling was back in the day. Because we have seen a lot of countries as well, but it's much easier, most of it nowadays. It's a lot easier to travel around the world. The world is more connected. It's easier to get visas. Processes are more streamlined. You know, you can get e-visas for most countries. That just wasn't the case back in your days, right?
No, absolutely not. Traveling to Africa needed a preparation time of 1 or 2 months. Once I needed 13 African visas in the 80s. And these countries were not represented in Vienna, or the most not. So I had to travel to Bad Godesberg in Germany. I had to go to Brussels. I had to go to Amsterdam, to Paris or Rome or to Geneva to get visa. Preparation for such a trip has been 2 months approximately. And well, once I had a little bit a bad experience. I had all these 13 visas, and the last embassy was the Angolan embassy in Paris, and they lost my passport. It's
What?
can't find it now, they wrote me. So I thought, okay, I give in, or no, I didn't give in. I started the whole thing again. My trip was postponed for 2 months. I had to go and spend quite a lot of money again for all the visas. I had to go to all the places and explain them why I do need now another. The embassy of Angola gave me a letter, which was very friendly, but they didn't see the problem on their side, let's say it that way.
Okay.
And then started again. And so those have been the problems, maybe. And as you know, as a traveler in Africa, uh, you have to spend a little bit of money on the way in and out. I mean, you have your yellow vaccination pass, and in Tanzania at Lake Victoria, and they tell you, okay, no, you don't need a visa for this, and no, you don't need. But I, in my authority, say from this moment it's necessary, it's compulsory, or you pay. So that's the way it happened.
So you had to factor in a few donations here and there as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I got sometimes when I came the fifth or sixth times to Arusha, I knew the border police already.
I would say overall nowadays it's gotten a bit better. What do you think, Philip? Overall, like corruption has improved. I mean, you still have it, especially in West Africa. A lot of countries there still fairly corrupt, but it has definitely improved, I would say.
I would
And
say
you
so
get
too. Yeah, because also
information.
the world's a lot more transparent nowadays. You know, it's if something happens. I mean, I don't know, Wolfgang, if you have seen the video, but I mean, I always think of the video of Drubinski and Alvaro, how they were in Africa. I think it was between Sierra Leone and Guinea, how they just posted the video of the border corruption, and just a day or two later, the officers were arrested. You know, so I think the risk of them of something happening to them is a lot higher than it was 40 years ago.
Yeah, because we
Right,
have things
so-
like social media nowadays, you know, things get exposed. If you can share about it, and then essentially it will trickle down to them and they get exposed, you know. So I feel like that has positively contributed to there being less corruption in Africa nowadays. Obviously, you didn't have those possibilities back in the
Well,
80s.
I had an experience in Kinshasa. I came out of a car of a German embassy, and some policemen, they controlled me and just they want to get some money. And then they decided to take me into a car, which they stopped. The driver was absolutely unhappy, and we ended up on a garbage haul outside of Kinshasa. Their discussion has been what they should do now with me, kill me, and or I have seen the numbers, the plates of the car, and in the time when they were discussing that, the driver gave me a little tip, and I could escape. Next
What?
day, next day, I got to the police judiciaire, and with a lawyer, which was the son from the place I lived there. And the head of the police judiciaire said, "Okay, how much do you pay me?" That was the beginning of that. He knew exactly that's where his policeman, and so finally the lawyer said, "Okay, I think we stop it here. Otherwise, you will never leave the country." So there's
Wow.
other experiences. The main thing today is the information. When I came the first time in the 80s to Djibouti, I had to go to the Alliance Française or to a French Culture Institute to get informations over the people of the Afar et des Issas to learn a little bit. You had no internet, rarely no, let's say, travel books didn't exist. The first one, which came via Lonely Planet Africa on a Shoestring, that was sometimes in the 90s and had all African countries in one book. And that was a little bit of help. but informations were difficult. And so I visited many times the German Goethe Institute or the Alliance Française, British Council, not to learn things about Britain, Germany, or France, to get information about the countries I'm in Dar es Salaam, in Nairobi, and they gave me good ideas. There is an art exhibition opening, and I got an invitation to come there, and so I got my most ideas in these places. That is the difference. Nowadays, you go to Google and have your informations.
Yeah, nowadays everything is so connected, especially in the travel community. You just post into a Facebook group, oh, what do I have to do in order to get a visa? What do I have to do? Is a land border open? Literally, nowadays we have Facebook groups where you post is this border crossing open on a Tuesday from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m.? And they're going to tell you, yes, that's my man Abdul. He can let you in. It's all so connected. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you also have the website. In Germany, at least, we do have the website of the foreign ministry where you have all the important information, basically. Of course, it's not very niche, as you said, they're not going to refer you to Abdul, but you have at least the official visa regulations, and then if something doesn't work out, nowadays you have so many embassies around the world, even especially with us in the European Union, we can just go to any EU embassy anywhere in the world. If you have an issue at any border or anywhere, and you're going to be helped. I think that wasn't really the situation in your travel era.
Informations were very difficult to get. And just as an example, there has been a nice hotel in the middle of Nairobi, and in the 80s they had a wooden border there, and all the tourists, backpackers, could give informations there. That stayed for a week, or you could say, okay, I'm looking to go up to Lake Turkana, somebody else is interested. That was the possibility to inform people or to get informations on a wooden board, some little paper pieces.
I have a very specific question. You have been to Libya, is that correct? Because I'm going to Libya tomorrow. I'll start my journey to Libya tomorrow. It's going to be country number 192 for me. And when did you visit Libya?
I visited Libya 4 or 5 times.
Wow.
At that time of Gaddafi, and that was all during Gaddafi, the first you had to do, translate the passport. So I had to go to a special office in Vienna. Then they translated the passport. And as you know, they start from behind. So there were already all informations, nice for all the border controls in all the Arab countries. And the next was to get from the People's Office. They had no embassies. They had the People Office of Libya. The visa, that wasn't so difficult. And then they forbid all Latin writings at that time. The only sign you could see is a question mark at the airport for the information. And when you were lucky, you could find older people which still spoke a little bit Italian in museums, and so that was nice. So, but on the other hand side, Gaddafi had his 10th anniversary as leader. And exactly at that day, I have been in Tripoli too. And they painted the main square green with an ugly green color of the Islam. And all the tourists they were okay, left side, you leave. For some reasons, I was one of the locals. I could go straight on. And it was very interesting. And 2 years later, 3 years later, I was again and again in Libya. And surprisingly for me, police women, Arab country, the police women in very neat blue jeans and so on, absolutely nothing about headscarf or so. That was a different time.
Speaking of countries that were very different back in the days, there are also countries which just no longer exist or that have changed the names, or countries that haven't countries that ceased to exist, right? You were talking in private to us about Upper Volta. I think you had a residency there, in fact.
Yeah, and I still have an old expired pilot license of the Republic of Upper Volta. Upper Volta is now Burkina Faso. And I'm happy if they don't send me the postbox bill for the last 32 years of my postbox in Ouagadougou.
Wow.
Yeah,
Is it
that's
exactly the
changed.
same government? Like is it the
No,
same
they
republic?
had twice a change, a bloody change to
Okay,
Thomas Caporet, and yeah, I'm not
right.
going back and fly there. Anyway, I
Right.
stopped flying at all, flying privately.
Mhm.
Yeah, on the other countries, I mean, Dahomey is later on Benin. Namibia was Southwest Africa. By the way, in Namibia, I have another good experience. It was the 21st March or December 1999, the day of independence. And I stayed in Swakopmund in a German hotel, Hansa Hotel in Poststraße. Yeah? And you could see the people were nervous. What's going on? SWAPO leader is taking over the presidency the next day. And some people had their baggage already prepared. And it was interesting to be there at the day of an independence of a new country, Namibia. That's more for the German speakers. I'll never forget the dinner there. There was an African, African, real dark African, and he served and said, "Okay, wollen Sie noch Möhren?" in a German. I didn't expect that. And then I lost my cutlass. Everybody looked at me. Möhren.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Speaking
And
of Namibia, you're there right
It's
now, Philipp.
yeah,
Soon to
it's really funny. I'm in
really-
Namibia right now. Actually, it's really funny. Yeah, the German influence has kind of been overtaken by the British influence. To be honest, it doesn't really feel like it used to be a German colony. Now it's kind of like another Commonwealth country. You do have some street signs, as you said, in Swakopmund. There are a few street signs that sound German, that have German names. But I would say in everyday life, it seems more British than German.
Well, at the time, I have been there in the middle of the 70s, the first time. Kaiserstraße is now Independence Avenue, Thüringer Hof. And it was definitely, they showed the German. And then they had a newspaper, the Allgemeine Zeitung. I think a long time ago it was a daily, then they made it once a week. And I got it for another 5 years. They sent it me to Austria.
Wow.
3 months later. And it's interesting because one of the people writing there was a very famous European, Otto von Habsburg. And the same article he wrote in an Austrian newspaper. I have seen it before. So that was
Wow.
interesting time. And another thing I'll never forget is when I arrived at the day of the independence in Windhoek, they expected 53, 54 and more head of states. Well, where could they park their planes? They had to bring it in the neighbor countries. And I stayed at the Avis counter. There was one guy ahead of me, and I could see the girl behind, real nervous. She had a problem. She had the 2 cars, but only one had air condition. And so I saw this guy ahead of me. Well, it was Bishop Tutu. Later on, one of the great persons of the independence. And Bishop Tutu was sweating and transpirating anyway because he was he had a good weight, let's say that way. And and he turned around and said, "No, give the car to Bishop, please." I opened the windows. In Etosha, it's fine when you open the windows. So I have seen Tutu, and they thanked very
Wow.
much.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I could tell you stories for hours and hours. I mean, there's nearly no country where something special happened.
Yeah.
One country that I'm very curious about is Iran. When did you visit Iran? Because my
Yeah.
great grandfather actually worked in Iran, in Tehran, a lot back when it was Persia, and he kept flying back and forth between Düsseldorf and Tehran. They had direct flights back in the days. And so my great grandfather has a whole like passport, which is almost exclusively filled with Persia stamps. But a lot of it was before the Iranian Revolution as well.
Well, I came just after Khomeini took over, half year later. There has been the Iran-Iraq war before. And in the Iran-Iraq war, I stayed in a basement, in a shelter in Baghdad. And that was when the Israeli bombed the nuclear power station. So it was quite a time. And with all the Ukraine today, I think I had this at that time. So at 7 o'clock in the evening, you had to go down under the hotel in a shelter, and in the morning you were allowed to go up. And
Wow.
you didn't know, are the Israelis bombing or the Iranians? Well, that was still the war. And a short time later, I came via Kuwait to Tehran. And that was still, people didn't really know how it's going on. I took a photograph of the Shah Palace, and have seen the military around, and I could feel they would allow me to do that. So when I finished, the one came, said, it's forbidden. I said, oh, so it's forbidden. Oh, sorry. And turned around and entered the next mosque, which is just opposite. So, but then they tried to show the Sheraton Hotel was an Iran Air hotel with a big thing down with the USA that was everywhere in Tehran. But nevertheless, it's a beautiful town, and Baghdad has been too. I haven't been since the bombardments, but Aleppo has been once a nice town, and I've stayed so many times, at least 20 times in Damascus, because we had a program to do there, and Damascus was the headquarter.
Nice.
Wow.
So what were the reasons for you to travel? I was just going to ask, how do you end up in a situation? How do you end up in a bomb shelter in Baghdad? And then now you said you had a project in Damascus. What were like the reasons?
Was the International Federation of Air Traffic Controllers Associations, a private organization, had contacts to these different countries in the Middle East. And two of the Innsbruck controllers were heading that resort for North Africa and the Middle East. In the 80s, I stayed behind the sandbags in Beirut. I had so many times the civil war in Beirut. When I see now the pictures of Beirut, it reminds me very much at that time. That was in the 80s up to the 90s.
It was really all for your job. So you actually had something. It wasn't just tourism. It was actually you went there for
in the Middle
work.
East. It was partly for the job, which had one thing. Beirut was the only airport Austrian Airlines had to take me out. Otherwise, I traveled always in the standby tickets. When the plane was half full, I had to leave in Damascus many times because they had a lot of freight, and the freight paid. I didn't pay.
Yeah, speaking of the, I found it very fascinating you talking about the situations where you had to stay underground. Like, what was the situation where you were the most afraid on all your travels?
In Kinshasa. Because
Kinshasa?
I knew they want to kill me. They were speaking French. Fortunately, my French isn't so bad, and so I could hear what they planned, and that was the most dangerous.
How long
moment.
did you stay in Kinshasa afterwards, after that situation? Because surely anyone would just want to leave, no?
Yeah, I left one day later, but I needed a day just to come over the Congo River, at that time Zaire River, to Brazzaville, to the former French Congo. By the way, it's interesting, the safety was much better in former French colonies than in the English. When I stayed in Lagos and got with Canadian air traffic controllers to their shift and stayed at the tower several days. And in the evening, everybody had to reunite in the transit room. They counted everybody here. And at the weekend, just over to Benin, that was safe.
Wow,
That's,
really?
yeah, that's definitely where an important point. The same with Senegal, the same with Ivory Coast. So
Wow.
in the former Portuguese colonies or in the former English colonies, the next point, they had water. Even in Djibouti, the last factory closed, a factory that made buttons. But Evian, or one of the French water companies, always controlled in the former French colonies drinking water. And that was in Lagos, you had to brush your teeth with Coca-Cola. Funny, I tell you. You couldn't
Wow.
get water at that time. So that was the main problem. I mean, we hadn't had, at that time, we haven't had the telephone boxes with cards. In Cameroon, I found them at a time. Hey, not even in Austria at that time. Germany Telecom just started. They had it
Wow.
via Paris. That was French company, and the same as you were in France. You used it and dial the number in Austria and Germany, wherever, and that worked, but only in the French-speaking countries. In Lagos, it was even in a hotel or in an office from one floor to the other. It was nearly impossible.
Wow. How did the local people in those African countries feel about you being there as a white European?
I I thought, I mean, they always think if you are white, you must be the central bank. They see in most Europeans, they see there must be money, otherwise he wouldn't be here.
I mean,
But
that's pretty much the same nowadays, to be fair. In a
yeah,
lot of-
I think that's still so. But then in Casamance, in southern part of Senegal, a taxi driver said he brings me to his little village, no water, no electricity. And that was quite interesting. There were little kids. They never have ever seen a white man. So they, yes, he's alive, like that. So that happened
Yeah.
too. But in generally, I must say they were friendly. I never had, except this Kinshasa problem, I never had any problems. And they were openly, sometimes I got the feeling, like little kids, children, nice, friendly, and I rarely had bad experiences. No.
What about
Interesting.
outside of Africa? Because now we talked a lot about Africa. What was Latin America like back in the days, for example?
Latin America was very easy traveling at that time. I mean, after 2012, when I came back from the US, I stayed quite a time in Argentina during 2 or 3 years, every year 6 months, and got to a school to learn Spanish there. And I mean, compared to that, Latin America was easy. Argentina, my favorite country. Buenos Aires, my favorite town. And usually people ask me when you could go to one of the places, which places are it? And it's Sydney in Australia. It has been Cape Town for a long time in South Africa and Buenos Aires. And once I sat in a room and looked at a world map, and I said, "Hey, all three are on the 34th degree south."
Oh, right.
Realized it before. My three favorite places.
What were
Yeah.
the countries? Because now you shared about your favorite places, now your favorite towns. Do you have any others to add to this list?
Favorite or favorite countries?
Yeah, favorite for now, and then we come to the least favorite ones as well.
Yeah, if I would go back to the US, I would like to live in Massachusetts, in Boston. For example, I liked very much Canada, the Ontario area, Toronto, one of my favorite places. And for the least, it's a little bit more difficult. I mean, I'll never forget the shooting 60 kilometers next to me in Kampuchea during the not anymore Pol Pot regime that was partly fallen, but there were still Pol Pot people shooting around. Other countries which, yeah, I mean, there's really no country I wouldn't say I can't go back. I would go back to Kinshasa.
You
And
can't go back to Burkina Faso because they'll send you the invoice for the last 32 years.
okay, if they find out. I mean, on the one hand side, I hope they see your video. On the other hand side, I hope they don't. I would go, especially to see how it changed. I mean,
Mhm.
the most of the countries I visited, I have been 2 or 3 times, some many times more. South Africa, 34, Australia, 39 times.
Wow.
Uh,
Wow. Wow.
so, yeah, that's Australia has another reason. As I told you, I did some acting for the last 20 years. And I was there at the theater festival every year. So
Oh,
Wow.
wow. That's amazing.
That's
Sydney,
far away.
yeah, and if there wouldn't have been this Lehman Brothers problem, I would have sold my place in the US. I had a pre-contract in Australia, in Sydney, in Warwick County, and I would have moved. But it came another way. So
Crazy. And you still
Wow.
commuted to Austria to work, right? Did I get
yeah,
that right? Yeah.
that's
So,
right.
so how often did you
Until end of 24. That were 12 years I commuted.
Wow. And how often did you go to Austria then?
Well, every time when I had to work.
And was it every week or every month or
No, once a month. Oh, every
once a
week. Oh my God. No,
So
once
once
a
a month,
month.
probably
And
most
then
people
there
would
were
be like,
still
what?
holidays, 2 vacations. So I
month?
would say the year I did it 7, 8 times. I flew over and back. So
Wow.
Yeah.
if you ask me if I like to sit in a plane, no, no more.
Yeah, speaking about transport, now you highlighted the good transportation that you have nowadays. Which countries on your travels in which country did you encounter maybe the worst public form of transportation? Because that's something that will have changed comparing it to nowadays. You know, if I go to Senegal
Well,
nowadays, they have a high-speed railway. Surely that wasn't the case back in the days.
they were never really high speed. I mean, you have railways, yeah, from in Senegal, you have it in Cameroon to the capital Yaoundé from Douala. And I would say the worst in the 80s was traveling in China on boats.
Oh, wow. That
To
came unexpected.
Wuhan. I never thought I will ever hear the word Wuhan again. In the pandemic time, we got that. And traveling in China was very interesting. You had no idea where to go. In the 80s, you looked at the board and say, okay, these two signs is Beijing. Otherwise, but you didn't know, is it going to Beijing or comes it from Beijing? Then you stayed somewhere at a railway station, but close to the wall, because 1 billion of people just passed you. You wouldn't survive it. So transportation in China, or with the buses, it was possible. I couldn't leave the bus because it was impossible, too much people in. And I got along and along to some place I had no idea where to be. And
Wow.
the driver is in a special cage in this country, glass around. Otherwise, everybody sits on the steering wheel.
Wow. And you mentioned the languages. How many languages do you speak? Because you just mentioned Chinese. Surely in
No,
most places.
no way for Chinese.
No, it's
But
difficult.
I found a very interesting guy in a small station. Let's say a small town means 2 or 3 millions of inhabitants. And he had a sign behind him because the tourists would ask for a sleeper white wooden bank, and so three, four, five, six different types. And he had a sign behind him on the wall, and with a stick he said, "Today no train," in English, "Today no hard sleeper," and "Today this and this not. Tomorrow other train." And he showed that it was intelligent at that time.
Wow.
The information. And the other thing was in Hong Kong, which was mostly the point of entry for me at that time, still independent or British. You got a Berlitz booklet. On the one hand side, the Chinese meaning, on the other, the English. And I stayed on this riverboat 16 hours, and I got a kind of conversation with the guy who looked, okay, he means that, had a lot of time. That was the only possibility. English wasn't spoken. I mean, I wasn't in those hotels with English receptions. So that was a country. Other countries, I mean, Bangladesh was quite interesting because they just had a revolution. So it was curfew, but I stayed near Cox's Bazar. I had to go back somewhere. How? And I did it. I wouldn't do that again. They were shooting around, and I tried to come in with some cargo van into the city. Well, with the local people, they said, "Hey, yeah, now come on," and the shooting again. Never again. But when he was 40 years old, 30, 40 years old, that's not a problem.
By the way, which are must be like a few countries that you visited that don't exist anymore. You said Burkina Faso. Was it had a different name? So
No. Yeah, well, the Soviet Union. I mean,
for
they
example,
split it up. I visited, except Tajikistan, all the countries after they split up. So I've been several times in the Ukraine. I've been in, because of the old Austrian history with Chernovci and so. And I visited the other Central Asian countries, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Belarus, of course, the Baltics, also Kaliningrad and those areas. Yeah, but countries, they never exist. Well, there is one, the only one I had to leave. That was South Yemen at that time.
Oh yeah.
South Yemen. And they found out after 2 days that I was private guest of the State Secretary of Transportation in Oman. And you might not know that there has been a time where in Hadramaut there was a kind of war. There were the Russian planes in Aden, and there were the American planes, the Phantoms, in Oman. And they fight it sometimes. It was not a big thing, but these two Arab countries didn't like each other. And so they found out, because it was written somewhere in Arabic, I had no idea, and decided I have to leave South Yemen. And the next plane was a little 12-seater to Djibouti. Once again, I came always to Djibouti. Yeah. And then a couple of days later, I found a Transavia plane, a Dutch plane, a cargo plane. They took me over to North Yemen, to Sanaa. And so made it this way.
Sanaa is one of the only cities in the world at the moment that's completely off limits to visitors. Tell me, what is Sanaa like?
Unfortunately, the building of this brick build, not brick, but stone buildings in Sanaa is unique. And I hope sometimes it will be possible again to see it. I've been there 3 or 4 times with friends. They said, "Hey, show me the Sanaa, okay?" From Cairo, it's easy to come there. And
it's just so unimaginable nowadays. I'm so impressed. Like I always had it in my mind. At some point, I want to explore Sanaa because it's like such a beautiful architecture and the old city.
Yeah, that's the architecture. Yeah, and there's a little harbor town. It's called Mocha. You know what we
Well,
are
I don't think I
drinking?
know it, to be honest.
Never
No.
heard of it. No.
Now, this little town Mocha got us the name of a Mocha. That was the place where they sent the coffee beans out.
Oh,
Oh, really?
what?
Yeah.
I was
No
gonna say
way.
it sounds like coffee. Yeah.
Oh, it's small. It's very small, and if you don't know it exactly, you wouldn't even find it. But that's Mocha, and yeah,
What's in Yemen
Yemen,
or where is it?
in Yemen, in North Yemen. Now it's all the same Yemen. I never tried to go back to Sanaa because to Aden, because I thought, okay, who knows who is there then at that very moment, and I wouldn't go back now, even if it's more safe as Sanaa.
Is there any country that you visited before and after it changed? For example, the Soviet Union. Did you go to, let's say,
Yeah, I got.
Belarus?
I did in the 80s. I did the Trans-Siberian Railway. I mean, had the idea. I start in Innsbruck by train, go Zelensee, Vienna, Budapest, Kiev, up to Moscow, and then I took the Trans-Siberian. And somehow the guy who sold me the ticket in Budapest, which was much cheaper at that time, and made a mistake, the dateline. And let's say the dateline, the hours. I mean, when I was one day, or I would have been one day late in Nakhodka. At that time, you were not allowed to go to Vladivostok. Many cities in the USSR at that time were forbidden cities, and Vladivostok, where the Pacific Fleet is, was forbidden too. So let's say 60, 70 kilometers outside was a little town called Nakhodka. And Nakhodka was the only chance to get a boat over to Yokohama, which I had a ticket, but I knew I'm a day late. So I decided to leave the train illegally because I was in transit in Khabarovsk. So at 4 o'clock in the morning, I just said, okay, I'm leaving. And looked for taxis at hotel. The only hotel. And very soon the police came, what I'm doing here. I said, I can check in the hotel. Yeah, what could they do? They could send me all the way back 6 days to Moscow with the next transit. They couldn't send me to Siberia. I was already there. What? So after 3, 4 days, the hotel showed me downstairs in the basement there was an additional exit, which I used every day because I was everywhere. Nobody had any interest there, and I was at the Ussuri River, which had some problems between China and Russia years ago, with a group of Coca-Cola people from Japan, and they told me they get a plane into Niigata. So I tried to get contact to Japan Airlines, showed them air traffic controller's license. Finally, if Russia allows, they bring me out to Japan. The idea from no plane was over at that moment. Okay, so I'll, I'll never forget the ticket. There was an old shoebox, and they took apart, then they took paper and a copy paper. At that time, nothing else. He made a ticket out of them and written Khabarovsk, Niigata. I said, okay, I want to hold that when I can get it. I couldn't get it because I paid a little bit and certainly not for the airline. So I ended up, and I had no idea where Niigata is at that time. It's in the north. I needed another 3 hours with very fast with the bullet train, and these 3 hours were more expensive than the whole trip from Austria to Siberia. But I was really so happy to be out. Yeah.
Wow. Were there any countries that banned you from entering? Because to me, it has only happened once in Mozambique. Just when COVID hit, they decided to change the visa policy in the same week. And then I was at the land border and they told me, actually, no, we do not. We no longer issue the visas on arrival. So they didn't let me in. Did that ever happen to you?
Not this way, but as I told you, the story from Yemen, when the South Yemen decided. And the other story was the Uzbekistan
Yeah,
didn't leave
and
me
with
out, so I
Tajikistan.
couldn't get into Tajikistan. But
Yeah.
otherwise, no, I never had any problems. As I said, I was usually very well prepared. The
Yeah.
most time was the preparation for the trip. And
Yeah.
when a trip has to be postponed for 2 months, as the Angolan story, then you have the problem to get reservations on any planes. China had also, I was there and there were only 7, 8 people at the gate. Uh-huh. Yeah, and come back tomorrow. Hold your boarding pass. Okay, a day later, I was there. And you see, that is also quite interesting because one of the space passengers has been now a good friend of America. She was the reason that I moved to Florida. So if the Chinese wouldn't have said, "Hey, come again tomorrow," I might not have lived 20 years in America.
Wow.
All these
Wow.
very interesting things. I should
That's
have worked with a company in Cameroon to build a air traffic control unit. It was all regulated. I already sent the paper or gave the paper my boss in Innsbruck and said, "Okay, I'm leaving. Don't send it to Vienna now. I still wait for a call." And the call came from Lomé in Togo. Stop, stop. Money was cancelled. What happened? Mitterrand was the new president of France. The first thing was he cancelled all those things. So I was still in Austria then. The next day I come back, said my boss, "Hey, Alex, give me the letter. I have to change something." And I changed it. So those are the points in your life where you're interested. Who would have been if it got the other way around?
Could you
Always.
imagine? Could you imagine a life without traveling?
No. Now I settled, but no. I mean, you have the choice. Let's say family or this and yeah, or more career or this and yes, or traveling. I decided willingly for traveling, knowing that I might miss some other things in the life.
Yeah. So it's like a sacrifice that you made, but it's worth it.
Yeah, and I think today I think sometimes was it good or was it not good? I still think it was good.
That's the most important thing. I have one of the last questions. Have you ever been to a country illegally where you weren't supposed to be?
Yeah. I entered several times Rwanda, Burundi. There hasn't been always border controls there, but uh,
So illegally
other
by accident.
by accident. Just think about. No, I didn't go over Panmunjom. No, yeah. I mean, you were sometimes you were in a border area where you knew the one feet was 1 foot there or both feet in the other country, but I don't count things like that. But no, you might ask now, would you count this country? I wouldn't count it.
No, I also wouldn't. I think you have to actually go into a
Yeah,
country. Yeah.
and I tried to stay several times in the country, and only very few. I traveled only once, the most in Africa, as I said, over 100. After 100, I didn't count anymore. You go through Africa. I even tried one thing, it didn't come through, to walk, not to walk too, but to travel without plane from Cape Town up to Libya or to Tunisia. In 80 days, it could have happened. The problem has been at that time also Sudan, where you couldn't go through, or Nigeria and Chad. That was a problem. So if I do it in time and then you hang somewhere around and you know already in advance, there is a problem.
But
And
was it a problem with the logistics or with the visas? What was the problem?
no, the transportation logistic.
Wow.
I was very lucky. Friends of mine in Jamena, capital of Chad, they said, "I want to go to the Lake Chad." I said, "Don't do it, don't do it." And the same day, a group of Swedish moved up. They got in they blew up, all dead. The car got on I think a kind of bomb or whatever. You always again had areas where Caprivi Zipfel, for example. I got with a taxi driver who was an anti-SWAPO fighter and said, we are going through, and if they stop us, we did. Yeah, it wasn't funny. And you couldn't leave the car because you knew on both sides there are mines in it. So you would go up in the air.
Wow.
Those are the adventurous things.
I
Or don't
love you have a look on
don't
it.
try. I'm an idiot too. Don't try to take a car over a dam which was flooded by water a little bit. The dam was at the Zambezi River, and I said I have to bring the car back. The other air traffic controller said, "You go." I try it. Never do it again. You have no feeling, and then you go around the dam.
So I think we're slowly getting to an end, right, Philipp?
Yeah, I think so too. We've heard many interesting stories.
There's
If
so
there's
much
any-
more. I wish I could talk to you
Yeah.
for hours on end. It's very, very interesting, Wolfgang.
Well, I
do you
come to Dubai and then we do it.
Yes, for sure. Do you have anything to add? Anything that you want to share that you have not shared yet? Anything that you definitely want to talk about?
No, I won't say in general, people, especially the younger, should do it and see the world. I see it around me. I'm still studying history at the University of Innsbruck, and I see a lot of people that have really not too much geographic idea, let's say it that way. And they should go and see the world, its worth, and not just look at a cell phone and a handhold and say, okay, I've seen it. So just do it, make it. You find friends, you find interesting ideas in other countries, like the Chinese who showed you no hard sleeper today. You find things where I say, hey, I could have had this idea. Why didn't? So I would say do it. And the preparation, which is very important, is easy today. And yeah, they should look your videos and then they do it.
Amazing.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
that's
thank you.
That's some great inspiration there. I'm sure a lot of our viewers will find your story incredibly inspiring. It's so fascinating to learn about what it was like back in the 80s, because I just have no idea. You know, obviously we know that it was more difficult, but the details of it, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
There's so many things that we
Absolutely.
don't even think about, you know.
So many things are digital now that you don't even think about how they were such a long time ago.
Yeah, traveling was a little bit different at that time, and every success you had was a real success because you prepared that long time.
Oh,
Absolutely.
very interesting. So thank you so much, Wolfgang, for joining us. It was
I
such
thank you. I hope I could give you a little bit of help.
100%. It was so fascinating.
amazing.
And maybe at some
Yeah.
point in the future, we'll get you back on the podcast, because I'm sure there's so many more stories to be explored.
Just do it.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So, guys,
Thank
thank
you
you
for
so much
coming.
for watching this episode of the Every Country podcast. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Absolutely.
Great.